With my goal to design an automatic farm for every item in the game of Minecraft, and this means I need to design a redstone machine that gets me an infinite amount of these lovely new cactus flowers. Hello there, Ray here. Although you can find the cactus flowers in deserts, we only need a single cactus to make the farm, which you can also find in igloos, trial chambers, or buying from watering traders. Now we can't simply just place down our cactus, hope it grows the flower, and then power a nearby piston in order to break it down into an item. Now the piston pushing part is just fine, it's the problem that the piston is too close to the cactus. This is because in order to have previous cactus farms continue working, they made it so that the cactus flower will only grow if there is no blocks that are adjacent to it, which means we can't have any of these blocks here if we want a flower to grow. Now, even though a double piston extender can reach in and break it off, while also reading it with this observer here, we run into a new problem. And that is, as soon as the flower is broken off, it will only grow a cactus here and never another flower. But we can solve this problem by letting the cactus grow up and then breaking it, and this will trick the cactus into thinking it can grow a new flower. So this cactus flower farm works, but it's very inefficient. And that is because every time it is broken off, there's only a 10% chance that it will grow another flower on top of it. This applies if the cactus is 1 tall as well as 2 tall, but if we happen to have a 3 tall cactus, then there's a 25% chance it'll put a flower on top of it. And Ofik made me this lovely diagram where you can see how this actually works, and he even looked into the game code to see how many random ticks it is between each stage. So it starts out with a single cactus, and then after this cactus gets random ticked 9 times, it has a 10% chance of putting a flower on top, but 90% of the time it will just turn into an old cactus. At this point, if it gets another 7 random game ticks, then it will grow a cactus block on top and consider itself new again. And then this whole process repeats with their 10% chance of putting a flower on top of that one, but 90% chance of it turning old and then placing a new cactus block on top after another 7 random ticks. But at this very last stage, it gets interesting, as once it has 3 blocks, then it has a 25% chance of putting a flower on top, with a 75% chance of just stop growing. So if we want to make the best cactus farm, we need to use these 3 tall cactus. But we can fix this just by making our cactus taller. But now we run into a new problem. As soon as a flower grows on here and gets broken off, now the game will never place a flower back on top again, as cactuses can only grow a maximum of 3 blocks naturally. So if it would happen to put a flower on top, once it's broken off, the game will just continue to try to grow it. Then it sees it can't grow it any higher than 3 and will just stop any type of growth. But we still want to use the 3 tall cactus, as it does have the highest chance of producing flowers. But in order to trick the cactus into growing new flowers, we're going to have to not only break off a flower, but also break off one of the cactus blocks, and that way this one will attempt to grow up again and place in a new flower. So now if we move our pistons downwards, when it grows a flower, it'll come over, break it off, but we ran into a problem, and that is you haven't hit the like button yet. But now we run into a couple problems. We can see that the flower item itself actually fell onto the cactus and got destroyed, because items that touch cactuses will get deleted. But we also run into a second problem, and that is, as soon as a cactus breaks like this, there is that 10% chance that it will grow a flower here, rather than growing up to here and touching our observer, activating it again. And if the flower would grow there, then the cactus will just stop growing, and this would break our entire farm. Since we can't have an observer in both these locations, how about instead of trying to detect the flower growing, we just have a clock that will activate this machine every once in a while whenever there's the highest chance of there being a flower on top. But when is the best time in order to have it break it off? Well, we know there's only 10% chance of getting a flower here, but if we let this grow up, then we have a 25% chance. So it's probably worth letting the cactus grow up and try to get that very tallest flower. But in order to find the best time, we'd have to run this test hundreds and thousands of times in order to figure it out. Or we can have thousands of cactus in order to speed up the testing. So after running dozens and dozens of tests over different amounts of time, we can see at what times do we get the most flowers. If we break off the cactuses too soon, they're unlikely to have the chance of getting their very tallest flower. But if we wait too late, that means all the cactuses are already grown and we're just wasting time, as no new flowers can actually grow. So after harvesting these thousands of cactuses at different increments of time from 20 to 60 minutes long, we can see that it produces a different amounts of flowers. So if we see about how many flowers it produces per minute, we can see that there is a sweet spot, and after doing several tests at 32, 33, and 34 minutes, where on average 33 minutes will give us around 39 flowers per minute. So let's make a redstone timer that goes off every 33 minutes. So we can make a pretty versatile clock just by having 2 hoppers push items back and forth, and they get locked and unlocked by a redstone block that goes between these two sticky pistons. But filling this hopper up with a total of 5 stacks is only going to get us a little over 4 minutes. But we need our clock to go up to 33 minutes, so we need to make this shorter clock turn into a longer clock. We can double the time it takes this clock to cycle just by putting in a T flip-flop here, so now this bulb will only turn on every second time. And we can read the output of this bulb just by having a comparator that is pointing away from it. So maxed out one of these clocks would be around 4 minutes, but with this added onto it, we now got an 8-minute clock. And if we would go ahead and add another bulb into this, now all of a sudden we doubled it again from an 8-minute to a 16-minute. And then if we go ahead and double it again once again by placing in another bulb, now we turn it from 16 into 32. And 32 minutes is really close to what we need, which is 33 minutes. In order to get this perfect timing, we're going to go ahead and stop the clock, and we're going to put in exactly 4 stacks of items, with 53 being in the last stack. And this will give us a perfect 33 minutes, which we need, so we can go ahead and close it off so it doesn't pick up any new items. So now we know the perfect time in order to break off to get the most flowers. But we're still running into the problem where the flowers can fall down and get killed by the cactus. But rather than using 2 pistons, we could just push in a wall of slime or honey, and this will come in and push everything off so it never falls into the cactus. But we run into a problem when we try to expand this over a large farm. We'll end up having to have one of these little setups for every single cactus that we have. But we can simplify this by a lot just by using the stickiness of the slime to connect all this to a single bar, and then have this entire thing being pushed by these single pistons. But we can actually do better than this, and we can do this by having a fly machine move this entire harvesting bar all at once. We can do this by having a sticky piston facing towards it to move this big chunk, and then one on the opposite side facing towards this to move this piece. So now we'll power this piston here to push that segment forward, and then we'll power this segment to pull it along. And if we time this correctly, we can make the entire thing fly across and break off all the cactus. We can easily time this by having an observer on the side of this pointing it towards this sticky, and then another observer facing this direction to power this sticky piston. So now when it gets an update from behind this observer, it's going to activate and time it perfectly so that it will fly this direction. So now we just need to hook our fly machine up to our new clock. We'll put in an immovable block right behind it, so when it comes back, it will get stuck on that and it won't just keep flying forever. Something cheap like furnace works, or if you have some type of obsidian. Now we're also going to place one in front so the fly machine can't take off while we're working on it. And then we're going to place a trapdoor on the back side of this observer, so every time it moves up or down, it will send the fly machine away. Now we cannot directly hook up this trapdoor to our clock over here, because every time this lamp here turns on and off, it will move the trapdoor from being powered to being unpowered, which will actually give us 2 updates rather than the 1 update that we want. And since the trapdoor flipping is making double the updates, we're going to have to also double the time that we have on our clock here by coming in here and placing in another bulb. We're going to do this by having the bulb come here, push its power into this furnace, and we're going to hook it up with the rest of the clock by placing in a block here and a redstone dust here, and that will update all of this, triggering the trapdoor. But while we have our fly machine flying off this direction, instead of just breaking 3 cactus, how many cactus can we actually have this machine harvest? Well, we do need to put spaces between them because they can't be touching each other. But we are limited on how wide we can go with this, since pistons can only push 12 blocks at a time. So this sticky piston here is pushing 5 blocks, plus another 5 blocks, plus these 2 blocks here, this piston and observer. That's a total of 12. So it can't push any more than this, meaning we can't make it any wider than 5 blocks. But when it comes to how long we can make this farm, there isn't as many limits, as the fly machine can continue to fly that direction as long as it is flying inside of loaded chunks. Now you can load chunks just by being in the area with your player, but you can also load chunks without the player, like using nether portals or using ender pearls, which I explain how to do those in these videos here. But there are some special chunks that don't need the player or chunk loaders in order for them to be loaded, and that is here in your spawn chunks, which is a 3x3 of entity processing chunks. Which means entities like our items will be able to get processed in those chunks, but not in these outer chunks. So if we can get the farm to fit inside of here, that means we can have it running 24/7 on servers or all the time when you're running in your single player world, as now crops like cactuses can grow inside of loaded chunks even without the player being nearby. So let's make our cactuses 3 chunks long, or exactly 48 blocks. We can see the chunk borders by pressing F3 plus G. And here is one chunk. So that means we need our cactuses to go from here through this chunk here, being the second one, and all the way to the third one. So the farthest our cactus can go is all the way to here. So let me go ahead and place down some sand in the areas where it's missing and remove sand where there is some extra, so we can place in a area of cactus that are 5 wide and a total of 48 blocks long. And you can turn your single cactus into many cactuses just by making a simple cactus farm. And then when the cactus break off, they'll get washed over here and collected in the hopper. So if we had this inside of spawn chunks, this would be the very edge of the entity processing spawn chunks. And we have 1 chunk, 2 chunks, and 3 chunks, and then our cactus end right there. But we run into a problem when the cactus grow up. That is because not all the cactus will get tall enough for our machine to actually reach them. You can see we get some of these short cactuses that will put a flower on them right away, and that will be too low for this machine to actually reach. So wherever you see just a 1 high cactus, come in and just remove the flowers on them. That way they can keep growing so that they're tall enough so that the machine will actually reach them. Now that all the cactuses are grown up, we can go ahead and send the fly machine in order to break them all down and break off the flowers as well. The only problem is once the fly machine takes off that direction, there's nothing to stop it and it'll just keep going. We're going to put in a return station on the back side over here. That way we can stop the machine. So at the top of these 2 cactuses at the very far row here, we're going to place in a row of leaves that comes across, with the last one being an observer pointing away. It's going to put its power into this block here, which is then going to go over here and then go this direction and eventually power a normal piston, which is sitting right here. Now we're going to put in the redstone in order for them to connect up. We're going to place in a repeater here on full delay and a full block there. And this way, once it touches it, there's a short delay before this piston comes over and it will activate part of the fly machine, which will send it back the other direction. Consider becoming a supporter of mine like on Patreon. But before we send the fly machine off, we can compact it a little bit more by not wasting honey here, but instead just having some other blocks that can rub up against all these cactus and break them off. So now we're ready to try out the fly machine. We're going to remove that immovable block in the front, and then we're just going to update this observer with that trapdoor. And now you can see the fly machine flies through and is wide enough to reach all the cactuses. And it's also able to go infinite distance, so it's able to knock through all this cactus here and break off the bottom piece as well as the top where all the flowers are. You can see they're kind of collecting on the edge of it. So when the fly machine comes down to our turnaround system, it's first going to touch this observer with this part of the fly machine, which is going to send an update that's going to go into this repeater here. And then this is going to send signal to this piston here, touching this observer over here, which is going to activate this piston, which actually turns the whole machine around after it stops for a split moment. And the reason it stops is because it can't push past this 13th block, being this observer block that we put in, which is in its way. But you might have noticed some problems with the items breaking off. Oftentimes the items would fall straight downwards onto the lower cactus, which would cause them to get destroyed. We do have some of the flowers getting collected on the edge of this honey, and we also have some items ending up on the outside. Now, out of all these different problems, our biggest problem is that the items are falling downwards and are getting destroyed by these cactus. The thing is, the flowers can either be on the top or the bottom, which means we need to try to collect the items from either height. The problem is, notice when the fly machine even gets remotely close to where the cactus is, it already breaks off. This is because blocks that are just beside a cactus will cause them to break, rather than the block actually being inside of the cactus. This means when it comes up to a flower, when it comes right beside it, it already breaks off and starts to fall downwards. So it's very difficult for us to come in and actually pick up the items before they get destroyed. So we need to have something that is really low as possible, in order to scoop up the items before they end up touching any other cactus. So if we had some hopper minecarts as low as possible, when they come in and break the cactus and the flower, hopefully the items are close enough to get picked up by the hopper minecart, and that way they get stored safely and they won't get destroyed in the bottom pieces. The only problem is that we have a push limit of 12 already, so we don't have room to add in more slabs in order to hold all the hopper minecarts needed to go across this entire thing. But we can replace these blocks in the back with our new slabs and still have the hopper minecart on top. So if we would remove this block and then come in and place a leaf block here, now when the fly machine flies forward, it's going to shove this honey into the hopper minecart, and then it's going to also pick up the slab at the same time and the hopper minecart, and they're all going to move forward and then break through this leaf right here. And now we have the hopper minecart inside of the actual fly machine with the same amount of blocks being pushed, so it doesn't have any trouble. So now when it gets close to this cactus here, it's going to break off, and then the items are going to get kind of thrown randomly, and the hopper minecart is going to come and try to pick them up before they end up getting too low. But we can see that there is starting to be a problem that comes up, and that is the hopper minecart is slowly getting pushed out of the honey. And luckily we have some nice leaves right here, which is going to realign it. This is another reason why we can't have this farm being longer than 3 chunks long, because the hopper minecart will eventually clip completely out and then drop out of the entire machine. So you can see after traveling this distance, it's almost completely out of the honey here. So even if you choose not to build this inside of the limited spawn chunks, you're still limited by how far the fly machine can go before the hopper minecart will fall out. Now using slabs here works pretty well, but let's see if we can do even better. So we know if we get this hopper minecart as low as possible, we'll be able to pick up as many items as possible before they get destroyed. So the question is there a block that is thinner than a slab, but is still able to move the hopper minecart? Because if it's too thin like this, then if the machine moves forward, it doesn't actually grab the minecart. So the minecart still needs to be inside of a block. And coming into my world where I organize all the blocks and mobs in game by their sizes, we can see that there is quite a few blocks that are thinner than a slab. And out of all these blocks here, the most important one is this one. And if we take a look at it, we'll see some important information inside. The problem is a lot of these blocks cannot be moved by a piston, or they have other constraints like they need to have blocks underneath of them in order to support them. But one of the thinnest blocks that still has a collision is a composter. But getting the hopper minecart to ride directly inside of the composter is difficult, because if the hopper would fall down to the ground, and then when the fly machine moves forward, it gets inside of it, the problem is there's nothing actually holding the entity upwards. So when the whole machine moves, it just falls out the bottom. So we need to get this hopper minecart on top of the platform that is inside of the composter. So once again, looking in this world here, we can see that all the things at the same height as each other are in individual rows, and we need another block that's from this row or higher that can be crushed by a piston and get destroyed while holding up the minecart. So we can choose between a scaffolding, 2 snow layers, or a repeater. So if we put a repeater down here and then we put in our hopper minecart, drop it onto the repeater, now when the fly machine moves forward, it's going to crush it, but the hopper cart fell a bit too far when getting clipped inside. So let's try a block that's slightly higher, like these 3 layers of snow. So if we do this again, get it on top of that, and then we move it forward, it clips inside, and then when we retract it, it's completely stuck inside of the composter, and it's sitting on top of the bottom piece, therefore it can't clip all the way through. And when we have it like this, you can see it's only sitting on 2 pixels, which is even lower than a trapdoor. And now whenever the flying machine moves, it's just going to move along with it. So now if we start up the machine, you can see it's going to go through, pick up all the items, and we don't actually lose pretty much any items from this side over here. Even when the minecart starts sticking up a little bit, it does get a bit poked by the cactus, but never actually gets poked enough to get broken down. And once we get to the opposite side, it's going to align the hopper minecart and send it back the other direction. And then when it comes this direction, you can see it is kind of falling outwards. So we're going to have to put in a row of leaves all along here to realign them when it comes to the docking station. Speaking of docking, this is a perfect time to pull the items out of the hopper minecart and put them into chests down below. So we're just going to put in a row of hoppers going downwards from all of these, and then we're going to have the chest down here where they're going to unload all their items. The only problem is none of the items are actually making it out of the hopper minecart and into this chest here. And that's because when this hopper looks above it, it sees a composter, and since a composter is considered a container, it tries to pull out the bone meal that could be inside of a composter. And this is why you would see people put composters above hoppers if they're not using the hoppers to actually pick up items above it. This would reduce lag because the hopper would stop checking for entities that just might happen to be above it, but instead just only checks this one container. But that does not help us, as we're trying to get this hopper to pull the items that are inside of this one. And since hopper minecarts themselves can only pull in items and can't push out items, they're a little bit different than normal hopper blocks. But this could also show up in other situations, like this hopper here checking this hopper minecart, and if there just happens to be an item on the edge of this hopper here, this hopper will not actually pick it up because it's too busy checking this hopper minecart to see if there's any items inside of it, and it'll try to pull those items out. But if this hopper minecart is not there, all of a sudden it can now pick up items, even ones that are on the edge of it. Ultimately, this means we can't use a composter here. So if we cannot use a composter, we'll have to use something that is a little bit thicker but has similar properties. And it looks like our next best option is a cauldron. So if we come in and replace all of these blocks here with cauldrons, we can come in and have the best of both worlds, being that the hoppers will be down low and we'll be able to pull the items out of them. So if we do this again and then we extend the piston, get the minecart inside of it, pull it back, and now the hopper minecart is stuck inside of it. But we still have a slight problem. That is, on the edges of the farm, some of the items can randomly get thrown out sideways, so far out that the hopper minecart can't reach them in time. We can solve this problem just before we actually crush the hopper minecart inside. If we just come over here and just push it a little bit outwards along the edge here, it will hang over enough to pick up most of the items that fall outwards, while also being close enough to the next minecart, which will be over here, so the items won't get lost in between. Since items are 4 pixels wide, try to not have a space more than 4 pixels between the edge of the hopper and the edge of this block. But when we're placing in our hopper minecarts, it's important that they don't push each other. This won't occur if you build it in the east and west direction, but if you happen to build this in the opposite direction, being north and south, notice it will automatically push away from each other, which is going to be problematic, so we don't want to build it in that direction. So we can go ahead and put in the rest of these hopper minecarts, coming in first doing the edges, pushing them slightly outwards, where the middle 3 will be dropped directly downwards, making sure not to bump them. Otherwise, if they sit between 2 blocks, they're going to get poked by 2 cactuses at the same time and get destroyed. So now that we got everything in place, if we go ahead and activate the fly machine, it's going to take off and automatically squish them inside. And then we can remove these temporary blocks that we placed in earlier so that we can get those cactuses to grow up properly. And now we can see when the fly machine moves forward, it'll break off the items and they'll be immediately picked up by the nearby hoppers. So any flowers that are at the very top almost have a 0% chance of getting lost. The flowers on the bottom might have a small chance of getting lost, but since there's only 10% chance of getting flowers on bottom, it's much less likely for us to even have flowers down there, where the majority of the flowers are going to be at the very top layer. Now we might get some cactus items that fall outside of the farm, but the main thing is that we're trying to farm up the flowers, as there is way more efficient cactus farms than using a flying machine. And once it reaches the far side, we can see that we have no problem in holding in all the items. And now, since we have cauldrons inside rather than composters, once it stops over top of these hoppers here, it's going to immediately pull out all the items with the hopper and start putting them down into the chest down below. And since cactuses grow so slowly, each cactus will only produce about half a cactus flower per hour. So by having the farm 3 chunks long, it will produce around 60 cactus flowers per hour. Now share this with your favorite Minecrafter and check out this playlist on how I made an automatic farm for every other item in the game. Thanks to all my supporters here, and bye bye!